Somerton Park, Adelaide, South Australia. 6:30 on a Wednesday morning, the 1st of December, 1948. The second day of summer. The sky's the colour of a held breath, pale ash-grey at the horizon, slate blue overhead. The Pacific, what reaches this coast as a long, low swell, hisses against the seawall. Behind the seawall, a single row of weatherboard cottages stands shuttered. A dark, gnarled Norfolk pine rises at one corner. The beach is empty. The promenade is empty. The body has not been seen yet. The case has not been given a name yet. The only sound is the surf, faint, even. This is what an Adelaide dawn looks like when no one is watching.
Tonight we go to Adelaide, to the southern summer, to the dawn of December the 1st, 1948, to a beach called Somerton Park, where a city did not know what was happening at the foot of its seawall. Stay past the dawn, dear listener. What I'm about to tell you has been told 1,000 times. Almost no one has told it like this. Stay with us tonight. By the end of this story, you'll see a face no birth record ever matched. What current AI image generators imagine built from a single clay bust and 76 years of nothing. It will not be a likeness. It will be an interpretation. But you will see it. 2 horse riders will dismount from their mounts on the promenade in 3 minutes. One of them will walk toward a figure he thinks is drunk or asleep against the seawall. The figure will not move. The figure will not wake. The case is older than the press. The dawn is still the case. Stay with me. Stay past the dawn. If this is your first visit, take a moment to subscribe. There's always a place for you at the fire.
Adelaide in 1948 was a quietly prosperous southern Australian capital. A planned city of around 450,000 people, set inside a grid of broad streets fanning from a central square ringed by parkland. Tram lines ran out to Glenelg, Henley Beach and Port Adelaide, the beach suburbs on Adelaide's west. December the 1st was the second day of summer. The temperature at 6:30 on a December morning in Adelaide sits around 15 degrees. Call it 60 Fahrenheit, rising to 28 or 32 by midday. The country was at peace. The war had ended just over 3 years before. South Australia was the most British of the Australian states. The 1947 census showed roughly 95% of the state's population was of British descent. Adelaide, in 1948, was a city at ease with itself. ASIO would not be founded until 1949. The city watched strangers without keeping a record of them. The case took this city 4 days into its new peacetime summer. The case would remain unsolved for 76 years.
2 young men on horseback. Their names are recorded as John M. Lyons and David Bowman. They are riding along the promenade at first light, riding before the rest of the city is awake. The dawn is just lifting on the seawall. The seagulls are out. The slow breath of the horses is the loudest sound on the promenade. In 2 minutes, they will be the witnesses who opened a story that has not closed yet. The horse riders were not looking for anything. The horse riders were not investigators. The horse riders were 2 men who liked to ride before the city woke up. The horse riders dismount. One of them walks down the promenade toward the figure. The figure does not move. The figure does not wake. The figure is a man. The man is in his late 40s or early 50s. The man is well built. The man is well dressed. He lies with his head tipped back against the seawall, the position of a man who had sat down on the way home and fallen asleep. His feet are crossed at the ankles. His shoes are clean brown leather. Clean, when a man who had walked to the beach in the dark would not have clean shoes. He is wearing a white shirt, a striped tie, brown trousers, a brown pullover, a fashionable gray and brown double-breasted jacket, and brown socks. He is not wearing a hat. He is not wearing a belt. The belt loops are there, but the belt is not. A half-smoked Kensitas cigarette rests on the right collar of his coat. The previous evening, two couples walking the Somerton Park Promenade had passed the figure. One of them had watched the man's right arm extend to its fullest length, then drop limply. They had assumed a man who had had a few too many at a nearby pub and lay down on the way home. The second day of summer, the first day with a body on the beach. There are witnesses recorded through 1949 who saw a man standing at the top of the seawall steps, looking down at the recumbent figure for several minutes, then leaving. The face of the standing man was not described. There is a 1959 witness, 11 years after the fact, who claimed to have seen a well-dressed man carrying another man on his shoulders along the beach the night before. The 1959 report is widely treated as a possibly true, possibly confabulated late memory, neither confirmed nor refuted by other evidence. The autopsy estimated time of death at 2 a.m. on the 1st of December. The man was alive, in the sense of still breathing, still digesting, at roughly 10 p.m. on the night of the 30th of November. The case's entire mystery is contained in those 4 hours. The body was taken to the Adelaide City Morgue. The trouser pockets were laid out on a clerk's table. 8 items. A narrow aluminum comb manufactured in the United States. A half-empty packet of juicy fruit chewing gum. An Army Club cigarette packet containing 7 Kensitas cigarettes. A quarter-full box of Bryant and May matches. An unused second-class rail ticket from Adelaide railway station to Henley Beach. A bus ticket of unclear direction, and at the bottom of the trouser pocket, folded small and tight, a square of paper. The clerk would unfold the paper the next morning and write down what he found. The clerk would treat it as inventory item 7. The paper would not be unfolded publicly again for 6 months. The clerk opened it the next morning in the back office of the morgue. The paper was torn, a rough edge along one side suggesting it had been torn from a book page. The bottom of the paper bore the closing words of a printed book, the visible Persian typesetting of a translated verse. The phrase read, Tamam Shud. It is finished. This was not the English language closing of the standard Edward Fitzgerald translation. This was the original Persian, printed beneath Fitzgerald's English in late edition copies of the Rubáiyát of Omar Khayyám. The clerk wrote the phrase down. A torn square of paper bearing 2 Persian words meaning, "It is ended." The clerk was not a reader of Persian. The clerk did not yet know that the phrase Tamam Shud was the closing of a poem published in English translation in 1859 by an English editor, Edward Fitzgerald, from a Persian poet named Omar Khayyám. The clerk would learn this 6 months later when the public appeal went out.
Sir John Burton Cleland walked into the Adelaide City Morgue the morning after the discovery. He was 70 years old. He had held the chair of pathology at the University of Adelaide since 1920. He was, at 70, the elder statesman of Australian forensic medicine. He would write the longest autopsy report of his long career. He looked at the body. He looked at the clean shoes. He looked at the belt loops. He looked at the half-smoked cigarette on the collar. He looked at the wedge-shaped toe configuration of the feet, such as to suggest pointed shoes worn for dancing, he would write. The dispute to come would begin inside this room, with this man, at this hour.
Cleland's autopsy report ran to over 1,500 words. The man, he wrote, was in top physical condition. His eyes were gray. His hair was fair to ginger, slightly gray at the temples. He estimated the man's age at 40 to 45. He noted the unusual wedge-shaped toe configuration. He noted the absence of a wallet, a watch, an identity document, and a belt. He noted the absence of any external injuries. The stomach contained a partially digested pasty. The liver showed destruction at the center of the lobules, consistent with a delayed-acting toxin. The spleen was enlarged to roughly 3 times its normal size. The cause of death verdict, he would write, the death could not have been natural, would be challenged 3 decades later by a researcher in Sydney. We hold both versions open for now and let the dispute run its course. On the 10th of December, 9 days after the body was found, the man was embalmed. It was the first time South Australian police had embalmed an unknown body. The decision was made in part to preserve evidence, in part because the body had begun to decompose in the early summer heat. On the 14th of December, the man was buried in an unmarked grave at West Terrace Cemetery in central Adelaide. The gravesite is recorded as P3-12-106, later shared with 2 other bodies in adjacent stacked plots. The burial was attended only by police and by pathologists. There were no mourners. There were no flowers. There was no name on the headstone. He had been in Adelaide less than 24 hours. He had no name. 6 weeks later, on the 14th of January 1949, staff at Adelaide railway station reported to police that they had an unclaimed brown suitcase. It had been checked into the station cloakroom at 11 a.m. on Tuesday, the 30th of November 1948, the day before the body was found. The man who checked it in had been seen by the staff. He was well dressed. He had no luggage tag. He was carrying only this one brown suitcase. The staff remembered him clearly. He was not seen by anyone else at the station that day. The case's most plausible reconstruction. A man arrives at the Adelaide railway station in the morning of the 30th of November, drops his suitcase, travels to Somerton Park Beach by tram, the tram ticket in his pocket suggests, and dies on the beach the next morning. The suitcase held a red checked dressing gown, a pair of size 7 red felt slippers, 4 pairs of underpants, pajamas, shaving items, a light brown pair of trousers with sand in the cuffs, matching the brown trousers worn by the dead man, an electrician's screwdriver, a table knife cut down into a short, sharp instrument, possibly a defense tool, possibly a suicide facilitator, possibly both, a pair of scissors with sharpened points wrapped in a square of zinc, and 6pence in change. The provenance trail of the suitcase is the bridge between the body and the city. The man's body was at Somerton. The man's clothes were at the morgue. The man's suitcase was at the Adelaide railway station cloakroom, unclaimed for 6 weeks. He had been in Adelaide for less than 24 hours. He had no name. In June of 1949, almost 7 months after the body was found, police put out a public appeal. They asked anyone who had a copy of the Rubáiyát of Omar Khayyám with the final page torn out to come forward. A man came forward. He had a copy of the Rubáiyát that had been in the back of his unlocked car in late November of 1948. The book's final page, the page reading Tamám Shud, had been torn out. The torn edge in the book matched the torn edge of the scrap in the dead man's pocket. The man who came forward had not known about the case. His reaction, on learning the torn page had been matched to the dead man's pocket, was to almost fall over backwards. Stay past the dawn, dear listener. The case's main piece of evidence had been recovered. The dawn was not the only thing at stake. The poem was. The case had become literary. The dead man's pocket held the closing phrase of a verse attached to the body. The phrase was Persian. The poem was English. The book was the last object on the last page of the case. The Rubáiyát of Omar Khayyám, in the Edward Fitzgerald translation, was first published in 1859. It had multiple editions through the late 19th and early 20th centuries. The publication detail that mattered: the late 1948 editions that printed the Persian beneath Fitzgerald's English were the only ones from which this exact tear could have been taken. The dead man's pocket held a torn page from a specific late 1948 edition, printed within weeks of his death. The case's literary detective was Keith Ramsay, who noticed the rarity. The dead man's book had been on Australian shelves for less than a month. The dead man's last artifact was the closing phrase of a poem that had been on Australian shelves for less than a month. In the back cover of the Rubáiyát, there were 2 phone numbers penciled in. The first, the one everyone remembers, was a number linked to a Norwood woman, sometimes filed under Justin in police records. The woman was a nurse. The woman was trained in Sydney at North Shore Hospital. The woman had a son, the ballet dancer Robin Thompson. The second number, less remembered, was a number of a bank. The dead man had penciled the codes of 2 Adelaide institutions into his book, a nurse and a bank. The detail of the 2 phone numbers matters because the dead man's pocket contained no other identifying information. Between the trouser pocket and the book, the police were given only 2 names, and one was reduced by the man's own reticence with the police to a single adjective: nurse. Below the 2 phone numbers in the back cover of the Rubáiyát, there was a code, a sequence of capital letters written in pencil, sometimes transcribed as MRGOABABD, MTBIMPANETP, MLIABOAIAQC, ITTMTSA, MSTGAB, although the canonical press transcription has shifted with each generation of reporting. The code has resisted professional cryptanalysis. William Suffield, a U.S. codebreaker at the Army Security Agency, reviewed the code in the 1970s and concluded that it could be a one-time pad message. Derek Abbott's later analysis, the analysis he would publish in 2009, would suggest a simpler reading. Modern treatments note that the letters may be a simple transposition or an encoding of family and place names. The code is the case's longest evidentiary footnote. The code has yielded nothing and been studied for 76 years. Both facts are part of the case. In June 1949, the police interviewed the woman in Norwood. She was shown the police reconstruction bust of the dead man. She was reported to have said she thought she might have known him. She denied any deeper knowledge in 1949. She never returned to the case publicly in her lifetime. Her son, Robin Thompson, was a ballet dancer. He danced with the Borovansky Ballet in Melbourne and later with the Royal Ballet in London. He died in 2008. Abbott's later research would connect Thompson's genetic profile to the Somerton man's DNA, but not in the way the popular press would claim. Thompson is not the body. The case's central unsolved relationship, the dead man's link to the nurse, is the only confirmed connection between a real Adelaide name and the body. It is the only line the case ever gave the police. The inquest was held in June 1949, over several days. The South Australian coroner, Thomas Cleland, returned a finding of death by misadventure. The verdict is a deliberate ambiguity, consistent with both suicide and accidental overdose. The inquest did not exclude either possibility. The inquest recorded the absence of any letter, any note, any explanation. Only the Tamam Shud scrap from the Rubáiyát. The magistrate left the verdict open. The verdict stayed open for 73 years. The case file would be transferred to the South Australian State Archives, a long archive of restricted public access, and would remain there for the rest of the case's formal life.
The case's medical consensus shifted in the 1970s. Dr. John Hilton, a Sydney-based researcher, reanalyzed Sir John Burton Cleland's preserved autopsy samples and proposed a different poison, the toxic glycoside digitalis, a cardiotoxic substance derived from foxglove, rare in 1948 forensic literature and largely unavailable outside medical settings. Hilton's claim was widely covered at the time. Cite not endorse. We hold both versions open. Cleland's original 1948 reading suggested a soluble barbiturate. Hilton's 1970s reading suggested digitalis. Hilton's reading has since been challenged in later literature. The preserved samples are the case's longest evidentiary chain. We hold both readings open, as the case's historiography holds them open. In 2009, a University of Adelaide professor of electrical and electronic engineering named Derek Abbott took up the case. His background was in stochastic signal processing, the mathematical analysis of random signals, and the Somerton Code was a natural target for him. He would run the case for the next 13 years. He published Who Killed the Somerton Man in 2009. He published The List of Facts on the Tamam Shud case that are often misreported in 2011, the formal fact-check page on the case, the source of multiple media corrections. He lobbied for an exhumation in 2021. He made the 2022 DNA announcement. His research was an act of devotional practice. 18 years on one unsolved answer. In mid-2021, an exhumation was granted at West Terrace Cemetery. The body, embalmed and buried in 1948, was lifted for a single afternoon. The exhumation yielded hair samples preserved in the original plaster death mask, the only viable source of pre-embalming DNA on the body. The formaldehyde embalming of 1948 had degraded soft tissue DNA. Hair DNA was preserved. Abbott worked with Forensic Science South Australia and a U.S. team, Identifinders International, headed by Colleen Fitzpatrick, to extract DNA from the hair. The case's longest investigation would yield, in one quiet Adelaide afternoon, a single usable genetic sample. On the 26th of July 2022, Abbott and Fitzpatrick announced the identification. The dead man was, they claimed, Carl Charles Webb, born 1905 in Footscray, a Melbourne suburb, an electrical engineer and instrument maker who had immigrated to Australia from England in the 1920s and lived variously in Melbourne and Adelaide through the 1940s. The identification relied on a second cousin once removed genetic match to a Webb descendant whose family tree had been uploaded to Ancestry.com. Cite not endorse. The SDD narration holds Abbott's claim with appropriate framing. A professor's identification, yet to be verified by South Australia Police. The case's modern moment was an announcement, not a closure. In November of 2022, ABC News Australia, as part of Australian Story, published the first public family photographs of the man identified as the Somerton Man, likely the first public photographs of the body in question. The photographs show a man in a vest and tie, standing beside a workshop bench. The resemblance is suggestive, but not conclusive. As of 2026, South Australia Police have not formally verified Abbott's identification. The leading working identification holds. The case's cultural status, unsolved, anonymous, devoted, persists. The case lives at the intersection of the work of the University of Adelaide, the South Australian State Archives, the Forensic Science South Australia Laboratory, and the South Australia Police. None of them have closed it yet. As of 2026,
the case has not been formally closed. The 2022 Webb identification is the leading working claim. The South Australian State Archives hold the original case files. Forensic reviews by South Australia Police were reportedly underway in 2024. The status of those reviews is unclear. Stay past the dawn, dear listener. Stay past the dawn. The case is still here. The phrase Tamam Shud is still on a piece of paper, folded in a case file, in a reading room drawer in Adelaide. The case's devotional legacy is the way the case has refused to end, despite every attempt to close it. The West Terrace Cemetery gravesite is a periodic pilgrimage site. A memorial plaque was unveiled at the cemetery in 2023. The Case File True Crime Podcast, Case 02, 2016, rerun 2018, has over 30 million downloads as of 2024. The Somerton Man Cafe in Norwood opened in 2019. The case is still here. At the top of the story, I made you a promise. You would see a face no birth record ever matched. What current AI image generators imagine built from a single clay bust and 76 years of nothing. What you are about to see is not a likeness. It is not an identification. It is what current AI image generators imagine from the period descriptions and the surviving artifacts alone. The image rendered for you is the artifacts that survived him. The torn page of the Rubáiyát, with the Persian typesetting pattern at the bottom, the pencil code in the back cover, the phone numbers penciled in cursive, the brown suitcase opened, with its contents fanned out, slippers, cut-down knife, scissors. The unmarked grave at West Terrace Cemetery, with 3 flat headstones visible. The dead man is not in this image. The dead man never was. What you see is the missing evidence, composed. These are not the dead man. They are what current AI image generators imagine. They are an interpretation. They are not a fact. They are not an identification. They are an interpretation. The case was opened by 2 horseriders on a December dawn in 1948. The case was never closed. The case has been given the verdict, death by misadventure, a deliberate ambiguity. The case has been reviewed by every generation of investigators since, and the case has refused to end. Stay past the dawn, dear listener. The dawn is still the case. If this episode helped you see the past a little differently, subscribe. There's always a place for you at the fire. Next time, we go to Niteroi, where 2 technicians walked a hill for an errand and brought lead masks back instead of answers. Sleep well, dear listener.